If you did retire to Australia, as you keep saying you're going to do, what's the one lesson you would impart to the local film industry?
Oh, I'm sure I can't teach anyone. The thing of my life has always been just to make films that you're passionate about and that stories that you think you want to tell rather than ones you think will make money. So I think the idea is just to go on doing what you do, but do it from the heart. I'm afraid that's the proper answer.
How did you feel when you first saw the film?
Well, look, I mean, this is going to be a slightly strange answer, but the film is sort of physically and sort of technically, I think, the most beautiful film that I've been involved in. So I was kind of just dazzled by the sort of texture of it. But I was also very struck by how we'd achieved, I hope, the thing that we set out to do in the very first place, which was make a film that had something to do with sort of social justice and with rights and things like that. Because when you're working on a film, you do have a real tendency to really focus on all the, plot details. Why do they get the wallet? How do they get to the station? When they get to the station, how do they get it? All that kind of stuff. We wanted to get all that right. And it was lovely, I felt, when I actually saw the finished film, to feel that we got right back to the feeling that we wanted to make a feeling about, a film that also touched on slightly bigger issues like poverty and justice.
The concerns at the centre of the film reflect your involvement in campaigns such as Make Poverty History and Live 8. It seems ironic that a film you adapted from somebody else's book for somebody else to direct is likely to be the most personal film you've ever made.
Well, it's part of that side of, it's part of one side of, I have a kind of schizophrenic attitude to the world, which does seem to take in both the, talking about love and family and friendship, and then the more social justice, poverty angles. But, the weird thing is, whenever you do the one, you always end up doing the other as well, because this is really a movie about friendship as well, which takes you right back to Four Weddings and a Funeral, which is about friendship. So when I did a film called Mary and Martha, which was about malaria, and that turned out to be a film about mothers and sons, and about family. So I think, whatever you try and do, it always winds back to your key subjects. Bridget Jones didn't have much to do with social justice, did it, I suppose?
Indeed, you could see with this film, Richard Curtis moving from first world problems to third world problems.
Well, yes and no. I mean, insofar as, the issues, the gap between rich and poor is an issue everywhere in the world. But
one would have thought by now that there wasn't anything you could teach Richard Curtis either as a writer or as a director. But I've got a sense you're going to tell me that that's wrong.
Well, look, I think what the gripping thing about this movie in many ways is just is the boys. And I think that what was interesting for me is that we wrote the film immensely carefully, thousands and thousands of hours trying to get everything right. But when we handed it over to the boys, who are not actors, never acted before, we had to let them break it down and reinterpret it in their own language. They couldn't act a scene where they had to pretend that in that situation they would be scared or pretend that in that situation they would be happy. It had to make sense to them. So I had to be quite sort of humble and say, we've worked really hard, we've got our version, now let's see what they make of that. Whereas when I'm making the movies that I normally do, I insist that everybody says every line in exactly the way that we've rehearsed it. So it was a whole new process, which is kind of fun.
Given how you like to have your hands in everything when making a film, was there a sense of liberation with this process?
Well, a sense of new territory, striking out towards Uluru, as it were. I was partly, it would have been hard if I hadn't trusted and loved Steven so much. I think that's the thing. If you're going to hand things over, or if you're going to take things on, you've got to really like them. When I did Bridget Jones, that was written by my best friend, Helen, so I really loved it. And in this case, I really loved the book. And the first time I read it, I thought this would make a great film. And I would have felt very nervous saying to someone who wasn't Steven, someone whose work I didn't trust, well, you see what come round and work out well.
There's a very strong religious element in this film. Was that a reflection of the culture that the boys were in?
Yeah, I think it is very much to do with the culture, and the boys thought about it a lot and talked about it a lot. And it's a funny thing for me, because I was very religious until the age of about 16, when I suddenly thought it was a choice between God and girls won out. But so it made a lot of sense to me, writing about boys in a crisis, that's what I would have turned to and thought about religious manners. I wrote The Vicar of Dibley.
Yes.
I've always been quite interested, weirdly, in religion and how it can sort of affect, and I'm very moved by it still.
In the film, you get the underlying feeling that there is something protecting them and guiding them as they go.
Well, I'm glad that's what comes over, and that's what they sort of believe. And when they were looking at trying to interpret the book, I had this idea, which I fought for at one stage, that they should see an old icon on the wall which says, "And the first shall be last, and the last shall be first." And they suddenly realized that all the numbers are heading backwards from the corner of the page. But I lost that one. Everyone thought it was too cute.
Given this film and how terrific Warhorse was, are you going to continue making more serious films? Or are you really thinking of hanging up the PC and retiring? Because it seems such a waste.
It's sort of, well, that's very sweet of you. I think the thing is you have to see what comes at you. I've just, in fact, for Christmas, I don't know if it'll reach Australia by Christmas, I've done an adaptation of a Roald Dahl book called Easier Trot. And, that's because Dustin Hoffman and Judi Dench are in it. So there's a very good reason. I think that my motivations for working may become less to do with me wanting to say exactly what I want to say and write and direct it. But I would imagine as a writer, things like a book I love, or actors I really admire, or a director I really want to work with might continue to tempt me back to the typewriter.
What kind of effect on people do you want trash to have?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do feel increasingly, there's much talk of globalization, and it's obviously a strange thing that someone like me should say, well, I'm the writer of a film that's 80% in Portuguese. But the more we worked on it, the less strange we found that, because we made friends with all the people there, we became interested in the culture, you saw all the connections between the world you live in and the world that these boys live in. So, if the film were to be a success, I hope that would just be another moment when we all realize more and more that we're living in the same small world, and we're all interested in and responsible in some way for other people's lives.
It's certainly unnerving to see a film about people who live off other people's garbage. If the film says anything, it's that we live in a very uneven world.
We certainly do, but also, to not condescend to other people's world. There's a great TV series called Welcome to Lagos, I remember watching, which was, one big chunk of which was set on a rubbish tip in Lagos. And there were just brilliant scenes where they were saying it's crazy and you can get a haircut for almost nothing, and there's some really good food available around the edges. So you've got to always make sure that you try and see, and I really love that idea of trying to, look at people's worlds from their angle rather than from yours.
There's talk of a Bridget Jones 3 and the Notting Hill 2. Do you have anything to do with any of these?
I don't think there's been any talk of a Notting Hill 2. I've been in and out at various times of various conversations about Bridget 3, but I certainly haven't heard anything about it for a year.
The scene in Warhorse where we see men on horseback charging machine guns, then cut to a shot of only the horses, is such a powerful moment in the film. Who was responsible for that, you or Steven Spielberg?
No, you'll have to forgive me for not really knowing, but I think that was Steven. I remember really early on in the process, Steven showing me a storyboard of that scene, and it was always something he worked really hard on and was very remarkable. So I think we should perhaps allow the great genius credit for that.